My name is Adele Marston. I'm 69 years old. I used to teach literature at the community college in Coldwater, Oregon, until I retired to care for my husband during his final illness. Since then, it's just been me, the old house, and my garden. Until my son died, and everything I thought was quiet suddenly wasn't. We were in court that morning, custody hearing. My hands were shaking, though I kept them folded tightly in my lap so no one would see. On the table beside me lay a thin folder of documents, years of quiet records. On the other side of the courtroom stood Melissa, my former daughter-in-law, dressed like mourning itself, though the only thing she seemed to grieve was control. She stood tall before the judge, her voice steady and practiced. "He belongs with me," she said, gesturing toward Eli, my 12-year-old grandson sitting next to me. "I'm his mother." I didn't move. I didn't look at her. I just looked at Eli. And Eli looked straight ahead, his back upright, jaw clenched like a man 3 times his age. The judge turned toward him. "Is that true, Eli?" he asked gently. "Do you want to go with your mother?" The entire courtroom held its breath. Eli paused, then stood up, calm. Almost too calm for a boy who just buried his father weeks earlier. He reached into the pocket of his blazer and pulled out an old phone I barely recognized, the one I gave him last fall. Nothing fancy, just something basic. He held it in his hand like it weighed more than it should. "Would you like to see what I recorded last night?" he said. I swear the air changed. The judge blinked. Melissa froze. No one expected that. Not from a 12-year-old. Eli didn't raise his voice. He didn't cry. He didn't plead. He just walked forward, handed the phone to the clerk, and waited. Like he'd rehearsed this in his head 100 times. Like it was the only card he had left, and he'd held it this long for a reason. What followed was devastating. Her voice filled the courtroom first. Melissa. Cold, sharp, clear. "You really think that old woman can keep the house?" "The place is worth $4 million, and it's mine the moment I get Eli back." Then came a man's voice. Brandon, her boyfriend. I'd seen him once. Tan skin, expensive sneakers, the kind who speaks louder when he's insecure. "And the trust fund?" he asked. Melissa laughed, soft but bitter. 50 grand a year for raising him. He's 12, Brandon. He'll forget his father in 6 months. I just need custody. That's it. After that, we flip the house and start over in Phoenix. Someone gasped. The room broke into murmurs, a few stifled sobs. But I sat still, frozen. I had heard that recording before. Eli played it for me in our kitchen, just hours after he whispered, "I don't want to live with her anymore." I remembered how I held him that night, how I didn't cry because I couldn't. Now the judge sat, back, stunned. Melissa tried to speak, but no sound came out. Eli simply returned to his seat, sat down, and folded his hands, mirroring mine. That's when I knew. He wasn't just my grandson anymore. He was becoming something else, someone else. The kind of child loss turns into steel. The judge turned to his clerk and whispered something. Papers rustled. A gavel echoed through the room, but I barely heard it. All I could focus on was Eli's face, calm, composed, like a boy who chose silence because it was louder than anything he could say. And in that silence, something shifted. This story isn't about a court battle. It's about what happens when a child chooses truth over comfort. When a woman like me, forgotten, quiet, underestimated, decides she won't apologize for loving too fiercely or for staying too long in a house that now holds both grief and legacy. And when a recording, just 37 seconds long, carries the weight of justice and memory. Let me tell you how we got there. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the day after my son's funeral, when Eli looked up at me and asked, "Can I stay with you, Grandma? I don't want to go back there." And I said the only thing I could say. "We'll figure it out, sweetheart. I promise." But I didn't know then what we'd have to survive to keep that promise. The house was too quiet. After the funeral, people left like shadows retreating with the sun. Casserole dishes sat untouched on the kitchen counter. Sympathy cards were stacked in uneven piles near the front door. None of it mattered. I found myself wiping the frame of Michael's photo on the altar I set up in the corner of the living room. It was the same one I'd used for his father years ago. The candle beside it flickered with a tired flame, like it, too, had run out of words. A soft voice broke the silence. "Grandma." It was Eli, standing barefoot in his pajama pants, holding his stuffed raccoon. His hair was still damp from the bath, clinging to his forehead. I turned and gave him a tired smile. "Couldn't sleep?" He shook his head. "The house sad." He wasn't wrong. I patted the spot on the couch beside me. He crawled up, curling into my side like he used to when he was little. My hand brushed through his hair in slow, careful strokes. "Do you think Dad is okay?" he whispered, eyes fixed on the candlelight. I didn't have answers, just instinct. "I think he's peaceful now." There was a pause. Then came the question I didn't expect so soon. "Can I live with you forever, Grandma?" My hand froze mid-stroke. I looked down at him. He wasn't joking. He wasn't even just sad. He was searching for safety, permanence. And in that moment, I saw it. The silent plea of a boy who already knew his world was shifting beneath him. I tried to keep my voice even. "Why would you ask that, honey?" He hesitated. "Because Mommy said she needs some space. She said I'd be better off with you for a while." I swallowed hard. It shouldn't have surprised me, but it still stung. I remembered the way Vanessa had barely stood beside the casket. She wore black, but her eyes were dry. She kept checking her phone. She left before they lowered the body, said something about needing to catch a flight back. Back to what, exactly? The last time she and Michael had spoken civilly was 6 months ago. Some argument about finances, I think. She hadn't stayed at the hospital when he was dying. Didn't even sleep in the same house those last few weeks. Just came and went like a visitor at a hospice center. I remember catching her looking at Michael's safe one night while she thought I was asleep on the couch. The key was missing the next day, and I never brought it up. What was there to say? Now she'd left her son in my care without so much as a real conversation. "Did she say when she'd come back for you?" I asked gently. Eli shrugged. "She said she'd call." "But I don't want to go back, Grandma. I like it here." I nodded, pressing my lips together. "You're always safe here, sweetheart." Always. But inside, my heart sank. Not because I didn't want him. God knows I would give my life for that boy. But because I felt the tremor beneath this arrangement. It was too quiet, too easy, too convenient. She hadn't left any legal paperwork. No guardianship transfer. No phone calls. Just a suitcase and a vague text. "He's better with you for now." What mother leaves her child like a dropped-off package? Still, I didn't speak ill of her in front of Eli. That was a line I would never cross. Instead, I tucked him in that night, kissed his forehead, and stayed beside him until his breathing slowed and softened. Then I sat in the hallway, lights off, and stared into the dark. Something didn't feel right. It wasn't just grief. It wasn't just the weight of sudden parenthood again at my age. It was that emptiness Vanessa had left behind. Too clean, too swift. A mother mourning her husband doesn't vanish. A mother grieving doesn't skip goodbye. I felt it deep in my bones. This wasn't mourning. It was retreat. And something about that retreat chilled me more than death itself. 3 days had passed since the funeral, and the house had started to breathe again, not with joy, but with the soft, aching rhythm of routine. I was folding Eli's little sweatshirt when the door creaked open. I didn't need to look up. I knew the sound of her heels. Melissa. She stood in the doorway, like a ghost who hadn't decided whether to haunt or flee. No hello, no apology, just that sharp glint in her eyes, the one she always wore when she came with decisions already made. "I'm taking Eli home," she said, pointing at the small blue suitcase by the stairs. "You've had your time." Her words sliced through the air like a cold wind off the lake. I stayed silent for a moment, letting the weight of them settle on the room. Eli, who had been coloring quietly at the coffee table, looked up. His crayon dropped. His face, that sweet, soft face, turned pale. "No," he whispered. He stood up, walked over, and without a word, pressed himself against my side. Then he slid behind me, like a little shadow trying to disappear into the person he trusted most. His arms wrapped tightly around my waist. Melissa folded her arms. "Adele, don't make this harder than it has to be." "I'm not making it hard," I replied, my voice low, steady. "He's scared." "You can see that." She laughed bitterly. "Scared?" "He's confused. You've blurred the line, Adele. He's my son, not your replacement child." That word, replacement, stung deeper than I expected. As if Eli were a slot I was trying to fill in my shattered heart. As if love came in interchangeable pieces. "He's not replacing anyone," I said quietly. "He's your child. And he's my grandson." "That hasn't changed," Melissa's jaw tightened. "He belongs with me." "Then maybe you should have stayed with him the night his father was buried," I said before I could stop myself. The silence that followed was thick. Eli clung tighter. Melissa's eyes flashed. "I was grieving," she hissed. "I needed space." "We all grieve differently," I said, forcing myself to stay calm. "But children don't understand space. They understand presence." Her lips trembled. For a second, I thought she might cry or scream. But instead, she stepped forward and knelt down, eye to eye with Eli. "Sweetie," she said in that overly sweet tone I'd only ever heard when she wanted something. "Come on. Let's go pack. Your room is waiting." Eli shook his head. "I don't want to go." Melissa's face cracked. "You have to. I'm your mom. I want to stay with Grandma," he whispered. "Eli," she started, but I stepped in. "Melissa," I said gently, placing a hand on her shoulder. "If you take him now, he'll feel like he's being ripped from safety. That's not what Daniel would have wanted." Her mouth parted, but no words came. "I'm not trying to take your place," I continued. "But right now, he needs consistency. A few more days. That's all I ask." She stood up abruptly, brushing off my hand. "You always talk like you know best." "I don't," I replied. "I just know how to listen." "That's all I've been doing." She looked at Eli again, then back at me. Something warred in her expression. Pride, maybe, or fear, or guilt. "I'll be back Saturday," she said at last. "He's coming with me then. That's final." Then she turned and walked out. The door shut harder than it needed to. I didn't flinch. I felt Eli's little fingers still wrapped around mine. His eyes were wide, red-rimmed. "I'm sorry." He whispered. "You don't have to be, love," I said, kneeling down to him. "You didn't do anything wrong." "Is Mommy mad?" I hesitated. "She's hurting, just like we are. But sometimes people hurt so much, they forget how to be gentle." He didn't respond. He just rested his head on my shoulder, and I carried him back inside. That night, after I tucked him in, I sat in the living room staring at the empty blue suitcase by the stairs. Something told me that Saturday wouldn't bring peace. It would bring choices. And I needed to be ready. I was drifting in and out of sleep when the faint chime of FaceTime stirred me. I fumbled for my glasses, heart fluttering with panic, the blue glow of the screen casting long shadows across the room. The caller ID read Eli. It was nearly midnight. I swiped to answer, whispering, "Eli?" "Sweetheart?" His face appeared, dimly lit, close to the camera. "Hi, Grandma," he whispered back. He looked tired. His little eyes were red-rimmed. "Are you okay? Where's your mom?" "She's sleeping." I used her phone while she was in the bath, and I kept the passcode. I remembered it. I smiled gently, but my stomach tightened. "You shouldn't sneak around, baby." "I know." He nodded quickly. "But I miss you. Don't tell Mom." "Please." There was a long pause. I watched him shift slightly, and that's when I noticed it. A small, bluish-purple bruise peeked from beneath the short sleeve of his pajama top, right on his wrist. I leaned forward. "Eli," I said as evenly as I could, "what happened to your arm?" He blinked. "Huh?" I tried to stay calm. "Sweetheart, on your wrist. Did you fall at school?" "Oh, I don't know. I think I bumped it into the coffee table." His voice faltered. "Or maybe when Mom pulled me up the stairs really fast. I was being slow." The blood drained from my face. I forced a smile. "I see. Thank you for telling me. I didn't mean to make her mad," he added softly, eyes downcast. "I just forgot to clean my plate." The ache that bloomed in my chest wasn't just fear, it was fury. But I didn't let it show. "Eli, listen to me. You are never responsible for someone else being angry. Ever. Do you hear me?" He nodded, but I wasn't sure if he truly understood. After a few more minutes of quiet talk about school, his stuffed bear, and how he still liked the smell of my kitchen, he yawned. "I should go." "I love you more than anything," I whispered. "I love you too." When the screen went black, I sat in silence for a long time. The house creaked in its usual nighttime rhythm, but everything suddenly felt unfamiliar, unsafe. That bruise, his tone, the way he hesitated when I asked. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. I was never one for dramatics or false accusations, but the knot in my gut wouldn't unravel. So I did what I always did when life stopped making sense. I started writing. I pulled out an old leather-bound notebook from my bedside drawer, the kind my late husband used to scribble poems in. On the first page, I wrote the date and time of Eli's call. I described everything: his tone, his words, the bruise, how he seemed afraid even while smiling. That night, I didn't sleep, and it wasn't just a one-time thing. Over the next several days, Eli called me twice more, once from a tablet he said was for games, and once from a friend's iPad during a sleepover. Both times, he sounded more withdrawn. He spoke in whispers, and always with one eye toward the door behind him. The second time, I asked gently, "How's your mom doing?" "She's okay." She gets tired. She yells sometimes. She says I remind her of Dad too much. I swallowed the lump in my throat. "That must be hard to hear." He nodded. "Does she still tuck you in?" "No. She doesn't really come in my room unless I forget something. Or leave my light on. Then she gets mad." My fingers trembled as I jotted everything down. By the third call, I noticed another mark. This one near his collarbone, just under the neckline of his shirt. He tried to hide it, but it caught the light when he reached up to rub his eyes. My hand clenched around my pen. Still, I didn't accuse. Not yet. I just kept writing. Each entry was careful, methodical, time-stamped, factual, with every detail I could remember. I even noted the background noise, the light in the room, the state of Eli's voice. I took screenshots when I could. I knew how this would look if I said it out loud. I was just the grieving grandmother, desperate to keep a piece of her lost son. I had to be exact, precise, undeniable. But I also knew this. Something was very wrong. The look in Eli's eyes. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was confusion, fear, the kind of fear children don't know how to name. One night, after his fourth call, I sat on the edge of my bed, whispering into the dark. Something's not right. And I meant it with every fiber of my being. I stared at the ceiling, then at the window, watching the soft rustle of the trees outside. My hands were cold. My notebook rested beside me, now filled with careful ink trails. My quiet protest, my record of a boy's invisible pain. I wasn't sure what I was going to do next, but I knew I couldn't stay silent much longer. A week after that midnight call, the knock at my door was calm, but carried the weight of something final. I opened it to find a man in a gray suit, briefcase in hand, eyes kind, but serious. "Mrs. Adele Carver?" he asked. "Yes. I'm James Lathrop. Your son appointed me as his attorney before his passing. May I come in?" My heart dropped a beat. I stepped aside and led him into the living room where the silence seemed to press down on us both. He sat carefully, placing the briefcase between us like a sacred object. "I know this must be difficult," he began, "but your son left behind some instructions regarding the estate." I braced myself. I didn't expect anything. My son had always worked hard, and Melissa had always made it clear that she was the keeper of their finances. I thought maybe there'd be a note. A small savings account for Eli. A box of keepsakes, perhaps. He opened the briefcase and laid out a thick packet of legal documents. "This is your son's last will and testament. He drafted it 6 months before the accident." My fingers trembled. I glanced over the bold type on the front page, unable to focus until he turned to the section marked Bequests and Distributions. "In it," the lawyer said, "he states clearly that the entire Carver estate, the house, the land, and all assets tied to the property, currently valued at approximately $4 million, is to be jointly left to you, Mrs. Carver, and to your grandson, Eli James Carver." I blinked. "To me and Eli." He nodded. "Equal co-beneficiaries. You as guardian until he reaches the age of 25." I couldn't speak. My hands came to my face as if trying to hold my breath inside. That house wasn't just a building. It was generations of memory, love, labor. And now it belonged to the only two people Melissa tried to sever from each other. I barely had time to absorb it when the front door slammed open. "What did you just say?" Melissa's voice sliced through the air like broken glass. She must have followed the lawyer. Or maybe she'd already known something and waited outside for confirmation. "That can't be right," she spat, eyes wild. "That house is mine. Mine!" "He never told me that." She snatched a page from the table and scanned it, jaw clenching tighter with every line. I stood slowly. "He didn't need to tell you," I said softly, "because he knew exactly what you'd do if he had." She turned on me, chest heaving. "He wouldn't have done that to me." But he would have. And he did. I didn't want to humiliate her. I didn't want this kind of confrontation. But I also wouldn't flinch from it. She pointed a trembling finger. "You manipulated him. That's what this is. He pitied you after your cancer scare, and he knew who stood by him." I cut in, voice still steady. "He knew who would stand by Eli." Melissa's eyes flickered. For a moment, I thought I saw something resembling shame, but it passed as quickly as it came. She hissed, "This isn't over." I didn't reply. There was nothing more to say. After she stormed out, the lawyer handed me another envelope, this one with my name handwritten in my son's familiar scrawl. I waited until I was alone to open it. Inside, a single page. "Mom, if you're reading this, then it means I'm not coming home. I know Melissa. She'll try to twist things. But you've always been the one person who never expected anything from me but honesty and love. I saw the way Eli clung to you, and I saw the way she'd look through him like he was a responsibility, not a miracle. You and Dad built this home, and now you'll keep building something for Eli, something better, something safe. Don't let her convince anyone he belongs anywhere else. He's always belonged with you. Love, Jamie." I clutched the page to my chest and cried for the first time since the funeral. Not out of grief, but out of love so deep, it still found its way to me, even from the grave. It was a little past 2 a.m. when I heard the frantic knocks at the door, sharp, desperate, and uneven, like a tiny heartbeat out of rhythm. Rain battered the windows as I rushed to the porch, my hands trembling. When I opened the door, my breath caught. "Grandma." Eli whispered, soaked to the bone, his backpack slung haphazardly across one shoulder. His hair was plastered to his forehead, eyes wide and glassy from fear and exhaustion. I didn't ask how he'd gotten there. I simply pulled him inside, wrapped him in the soft flannel quilt I kept by the entryway, and locked the door behind him. "My sweet boy," I whispered, kneeling to his level. "What happened?" He shook his head and shivered. "Don't make me go back." Please, I guided him to the couch and helped him out of his wet clothes, replacing them with one of my oversized sweaters. He looked so small in it, like a child playing dress-up, except this was no game. I turned on the kettle, my hands moving by instinct more than thought. I brewed ginger tea with honey, just like I used to when he had a cold or couldn't sleep. When I handed him the mug, he clutched it with both hands. "Eli," I said gently, "you have to tell me what's going on. I need to know, sweetheart." His lower lip trembled. He looked away. "Did someone hurt you?" He didn't answer, but the way his shoulders tensed told me everything. "I'll protect you," I whispered, reaching for his hand. "You're safe here. No one will hurt you while you're with me." He leaned into me, finally letting the tears fall, silent, but steady. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat up beside him, watching his small chest rise and fall as he curled under the blanket on my sofa. The storm outside raged, but in here, it was a quiet, still pocket of truth. A boy who had run from something terrifying, and a grandmother who would no longer pretend it wasn't happening. At sunrise, I reheated his tea and scrambled some eggs. He barely ate, but thanked me with a soft, "You make the best eggs." I smiled and ruffled his hair. "You've always said that." Around 9, I heard tires screeching on the gravel driveway. I looked out and saw a police cruiser and Melissa storming out of the passenger seat like a woman possessed. Her hair was wild, her coat flapping behind her like a cape in the wind. The officer struggled to keep up. She banged on the door so hard I thought the hinges might snap. I told Eli to stay in the kitchen and walked to the door, opening it slowly. Melissa's eyes were bloodshot, her voice sharp. "You have no right," she shouted. "You took him. He's my son." "I didn't take him," I said calmly. "He came to me." "You're going to regret this, Adele," she seethed. "You're going to pay." "This is kidnapping." The officer stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "Ma'am, we received a call about a possible missing child." "Is the boy here?" I nodded. "He is." He showed up at my door last night during the storm. Wet, cold, frightened. I did what any grandmother would do. I took him in. "Where is he now?" the officer asked. Before I could answer, Eli emerged from the kitchen, his little hands clutching the hem of my cardigan. "Grandma didn't kidnap me," he said clearly, eyes locked on the officer. "I ran here because I was scared." Melissa tried to lunge forward, but I instinctively pulled Eli behind me. "Don't touch him," I warned, my voice low but firm. The officer's eyes flicked between us. "We'll need to take a statement from both of you," he said, "and there'll be an investigation into the circumstances." "Fine," I said, "but he's not going anywhere until then." Melissa's voice cracked. "He belongs with me." Eli shook his head. "I want to stay here." With Grandma, those words hung in the air like church bells on a silent street. I saw something flicker in Melissa's expression, shock, maybe even hurt, but it was quickly swallowed by anger. "I'll see you in court," she spat, turning on her heel and storming back to the car. As the cruiser pulled away, I looked down at Eli, who was still holding on to me. "You did great," I whispered. "I'm proud of you." He didn't speak, just leaned his head against my side, and I knew then I wouldn't let him go, no matter what came next. I waited until Eli fell asleep that night, curled up beside me on the old couch with a knitted blanket pulled over his small shoulders. The rain had slowed to a whisper outside. The police had left. Melissa had left. But her threats lingered in the room like cigarette smoke. Once the house was quiet, I went to the bedroom. There was one place I hadn't opened in years, the safe in the back of the closet. Thomas had once tucked away a few things he said were for later. And after the funeral, I hadn't been able to bring myself to look. My hands trembled as I turned the dial. I still remembered the numbers. His birthday, my birthday, and Eli's. The safe creaked open, releasing a stale scent of old paper and leather. Inside, wrapped in a navy handkerchief, was Thomas's wallet, the one they'd given back to me after the accident. I'd never opened it. Not really. I had just buried it beneath the weight of too many feelings. I sat down slowly, the wallet heavy in my palms. The leather was worn, creased and scratched, but it still smelled like him, that familiar mix of cedarwood and motor oil. I took a deep breath before unfolding it. There were receipts from the hardware store, a faded picture of Eli on his 3rd birthday, face covered in cake, eyes full of joy, and a small folded piece of paper tucked behind his license. It was a letter. My vision blurred instantly, but I forced myself to read. If anything happens to me, I want Mom to raise Eli. She's the only one who really sees him, the only one who understands how to hold a boy like him, with strength, but not too tight. I know Melissa means well, but she doesn't listen. She doesn't see him. But you do, Mom. You always have. You raised me right. I want you to do the same for him. The ink was smudged in one corner, maybe from his thumb, or maybe a tear. I'll never know. I sat there, letter in hand, as the weight of his words settled into my chest, like a stone. He had known. He had felt the tension in his own home, had sensed the distance between Melissa and Eli, growing like a crack in a windshield, slow but spreading. He knew who would catch his son when he was gone, and he had written it down. Not in a will, not in a formal legal document, but in the quiet honesty of a father who knew what mattered. Tears spilled silently down my cheeks as I unfolded one more item from the wallet. A tiny flash drive. I walked over to my laptop and plugged it in, unsure of what to expect. It was a video, dated a year before the accident. The screen lit up with sunlight and birdsong. Thomas was in the backyard, holding a hose, chasing a laughing Eli around a sprinkler. His voice was warm, full of laughter. "Come here, little man. You're not fast enough." Eli shrieked with joy and ran toward the camera, soaked and grinning. Then the camera shifted. Thomas set it down somewhere, and suddenly, he was in the frame. He picked Eli up, twirled him in the air, and kissed his forehead. Then he looked straight into the camera, still holding his son. If anything ever happens to me, I hope someone shows this to the court. This is my boy. I want my mom to raise him. She's his safe place. That was it. Short, but enough. I sat back, sobbing quietly, the kind of tears that come from a place deeper than grief, something tangled in love and loss and gratitude. He had left me a key, not to a house, not to money, but to his son's future. And more than that, he had trusted me. He believed in me. I pressed a hand to my chest and whispered, "Thank you, Thomas. I won't fail you. I swear it." In the other room, Eli stirred. I wiped my face quickly, composed myself, and tiptoed back to his side. I knelt beside him, brushing a damp curl from his forehead. "I found your daddy's letter," I whispered. "He says he wants you to be with me." Eli didn't open his eyes, but his hand found mine in the dark. No," he mumbled sleepily. "He told me." In my dream, I kissed the back of his hand and held it tighter. The storm outside had passed, but in my heart, I knew the real storm was still ahead. Melissa wasn't going to let this go, but now I had something more powerful than anger. I had my son's voice, his written words, his wishes, and I was going to honor them with everything I had left. I never changed a thing in Eli's old room. After Thomas passed, Melissa insisted on converting it into a guest room. "He's too old for teddy bears and that silly rocket lamp," she scoffed, but I refused. I kept the star-patterned bedding, the worn bookshelf with its crooked spine of goodnight moon, and even the glow-in-the-dark constellations stuck to the ceiling. It was my sanctuary. When Eli came to live with me, I didn't need to show him the way to that room. He walked straight to it, opened the door, and paused. I saw something shift in his face, not just nostalgia, but a sense of being seen, like his memories hadn't been erased. like he hadn't been erased. He looked at the toy astronaut on the windowsill and whispered, "You still kept him." "Of course I did." I smiled gently. "Everything in this room knows your name, Eli." We didn't speak more that evening. He curled up under the faded quilt, and I closed the door quietly. But in the morning, I brought him a warm mug of cinnamon milk and sat on the edge of the bed. "I want to show you something," I said, holding up my phone. He tilted his head, curious. "It's called a voice journal," I explained. "When your grandpa got sick, I didn't know how to deal with the silence. So I started talking into this little app. Just my thoughts, little things. It helped." Eli took the phone gently, staring at the screen. "Now, I want you to make your own," I said, brushing his hair back. "But not just feelings. I want you to record everything. If anything feels wrong or someone says something that makes you uneasy, record it. If something doesn't sit right, record it." He blinked. "Even if it's Mom?" I paused. "Especially if it's someone close. You don't need to tell anyone. Just have your own record." He didn't nod. He didn't speak. But later that day, I passed his room and heard him whispering into my old phone. "This is Eli," he said softly. "It's Tuesday." "I'm safe right now." I stood outside, tears burning the back of my eyes. Over the next few days, I noticed subtle changes in him. He seemed more anchored. Not happy. No, happiness was still a distant shore. But he wasn't drifting anymore. He recorded small things, the neighbor's dog barking, the ticking of the hallway clock, even me humming as I gardened. But every now and then, I caught a strange edge in his voice in some entries. He would say things like, "She told me not to tell you what happened in school." Or, "Uncle Barry came by. He asked weird questions. That name sent a chill through me." Barry, Melissa's brother, the one who always acted a little too friendly with Eli. I made a mental note to dig deeper. One evening, Eli came into the kitchen with the phone clutched tight in his hand. "Grandma," he whispered, "do you know how to hide videos?" I froze. "Why do you ask, sweetheart?" He glanced over his shoulder, then leaned in. "Because I want to record something, and I don't want Mom to find it." I knelt down and took his hands in mine. "You only need to record if you feel unsafe, Eli. You hear me?" He nodded. "I do. That's why I need to." There was no panic in his voice, just quiet resolve. That night, I stayed up rewatching the old clip I'd found in Thomas's wallet. The one of Eli and his father running barefoot through the garden, laughing like the world was still whole. Thomas had held the camera awkwardly, his voice clear through the wind, saying, "Hey, buddy, tell the world what you want to be when you grow up." Eli had shouted, "A protector, like you, Dad." And now, in a quiet room lit by moonlight, I watched that little boy become exactly that, for himself. I helped Eli set up a folder within the Voice Journal app, hidden behind a calculator interface. Only someone who knew what to tap could find it. He practiced once, twice, then smiled. "I got it," he said. From that point on, I saw him carry the phone like it was armor. One morning, he came to me with a furrowed brow. "I recorded something, Grandma, but I don't know what it means. I didn't ask to hear it. Not yet." Instead, I hugged him and said, "When the time comes, we'll know what to do." I was no longer just a grieving mother. I was becoming the witness, the shield, and if I had to be, the sword. And Eli, with his soft steps and quiet courage, was learning not to shrink, but to document. Our little room, untouched by time, had become a fortress, and inside it, a boy was learning to reclaim the voice that fear tried to steal. The day I received the first video from Eli, I knew we had crossed an invisible line, one we could never return from. It came late in the evening. I was finishing the dishes when my phone buzzed. It was from the secure app I had installed on Eli's tablet. I had taught him how to use it, privately, quietly, just between the two of us. No messages unless it was urgent. No recordings unless something didn't feel right. I opened it with a trembling hand. The video was shaky, like it had been recorded under a blanket or behind a pillow. But the sound was clear. "You're not taking that to your grandmother again, are you?" Her voice hissed. There was a pause, then Eli's small, frightened voice. "I just wanted to say goodnight." A sharp rustle, then a cry. The camera caught her arm reaching out, yanking the tablet. The image cut to black, but not before I saw the fear in his eyes. I sat there frozen. My knees weakened beneath me as I slid to the floor, phone still in hand, replaying the moment again and again. There was no mistaking what I'd seen, no room for interpretation. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was harm. That night, I didn't sleep. I opened my laptop, started a private folder labeled Eli Protection Plan. I saved the video there, encrypting it, backing it up in 3 locations. Printed still frames. Transcribed the audio. I documented everything. Times, dates, timestamps, prior incidents he had mentioned in passing, but I had hesitated to act upon. No more hesitation. The next morning, I called my lawyer. "Ma'am, are you ready to proceed?" He asked gently, voice low with concern. He had been waiting for me to make this decision. Ever since the day I sat in his office with my son's will, tears clouding my vision, whispering, "She's not safe for him, but I'm afraid no one will believe me." "I'm ready to fight," I said clearly. No tremble in my voice this time. No more waiting. We began assembling a case, quietly, strategically. Every email I sent to her was documented. Every reply she gave, every delay in bringing Eli for a scheduled visit, every excuse, all neatly stored. But the cornerstone was Eli's own voice, his own video. Children shouldn't have to protect themselves. But when they do, when they're brave enough to try, it's on the adults who love them to rise and carry that burden for them. I went back to the room I had kept for him, untouched, a child's world preserved in lavender and soft gray. I whispered, "I saw it, baby. I saw what you showed me, and I believe you." The next time he visited, I didn't say anything at first. I didn't want to frighten him. But when we were alone in the garden, planting herbs like we always did, I knelt beside him and said, "You did the right thing, Eli." He paused, hands in the soil. "Will they be mad?" "Maybe," I said honestly. "But being brave isn't about making everyone happy. It's about keeping yourself safe." He didn't speak for a moment. Then he leaned into me, resting his forehead against my shoulder. "I miss Daddy," he whispered. I held him close, heart cracking open. "I do too, honey." But he left us a message, remember? He trusted me. He trusted you. And we're going to be okay. I promise the war had begun, not in anger, but in quiet, methodical resolve. I didn't need vengeance. I didn't want destruction. I wanted protection, truth, and peace for a little boy who deserved to be a child, not a silent survivor. The bruises may not have shown on his skin, but the bruises didn't lie. And neither would I. They scheduled the mediation in a cramped courthouse room that smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and tension. I wore my navy cardigan, the one Eli said made me look like a professor, and held my breath the entire walk in. Melissa sat across from me in a silk blouse, pale pink, no wrinkles, no remorse. The judge hadn't even sat down yet when she leaned over and whispered to her lawyer loud enough for me to hear, "She's just bitter because he picked me." I didn't flinch. I'd spent weeks preparing with my attorney, Jennifer, sharp, composed, and just old enough to understand heartbreak, just young enough to still be shocked by cruelty. When the session began, Melissa launched into a performance so syrupy it could rot teeth. She dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief and said, "Your Honor, I am a grieving widow. I lost my husband, and now this woman wants to take my child. My only child." She made it sound like I was kidnapping him. She pressed a palm to her chest, as if overwhelmed. "I just want peace. I just want my son back. He's all I have left." I looked at her, and for 1 second, just one, I saw the girl my son once loved. But then I remembered the bruise on Eli's forearm, the hollow fear in his voice when he said, "She smashed my tablet, Grandma." It had the voice messages you sent Jennifer cleared her throat and opened the binder we had compiled. "We have submitted preliminary evidence to the court. While we understand it hasn't all been formally verified, we believe it's crucial for Your Honor to review some of the material." She passed a USB drive forward. The mediator, a weary man in his 50s with tired blue eyes, glanced at the drive and shook his head. "Unless it's been authenticated, I can't allow it to weigh into this proceeding. We are here for mediation, not litigation." But Jennifer tried. He raised his hand. "Save it for the judge if this proceeds to court." Melissa sniffled again, producing a perfectly timed tear. "This is harassment. I'm just trying to raise my son." I sat still, spine straight, but inside, something was unraveling. The meeting ended with no agreement. The mediator advised both parties to reconsider the emotional toll of a custody battle. I nodded silently. Melissa blew her nose and told him, "I just want to be a good mom." I'm sorry my mother-in-law doesn't believe in second chances. I walked out of that courthouse and felt nothing. No anger, no fire. Just a weight pressing into my chest like wet concrete. Jennifer caught up with me outside. "We'll appeal. We'll push it to court. With time, the evidence will hold." Don't give up. Now I didn't answer her. I couldn't. The drive home was a blur of red lights and gray sky. I couldn't even remember turning the engine on. I just remember sitting in the driveway, staring at the rosemary bush Eli had helped me plant in spring. I made tea, sat at the kitchen table, let the mug go cold. Then, my phone buzzed. Eli. A video. I opened it with trembling hands. The screen showed the hallway in Melissa's apartment. Eli had hidden his phone on, top of a bookshelf. The camera caught Melissa screaming into the void. "I'm your mother." I say what goes. You think that old woman loves you more than I do? She's poisoning your mind. I heard Eli's small voice. "Please don't yell." Then a crash, ceramic shattering. Something off-screen, maybe a plate. He was silent. She screamed again, "Answer me!" The video ended with the sound of footsteps storming away. I covered my mouth. Tears spilled, not from sadness this time, but fury so pure and hot, it singed the inside of my throat. Another ping. A second video. Melissa sobbing on the phone to someone. "If he testifies for her, I'm done. I'll lose him. I need to shut this down." "You owe me," I saved both files. Then came a voice memo from Eli. "Grandma, I remembered what you said. If you feel unsafe, record. I got more videos. I can help, I cried. Not because of what he captured, but because my grandson, my brave boy, still believed that truth had power. I stood up, reached for the manila folder tucked beneath the fruit bowl. Every screenshot, every journal entry, every audio file, every transcript. I slipped the flash drive into a padded envelope, printed out the video timestamps. I picked up the phone and called Jennifer. Her voice was cautious. Adele? I said only one thing. I'm ready to fight. That night, I couldn't sleep. After everything that happened at the mediation, Melissa's crocodile tears, her performance, the judge's dismissive tone, I felt powerless. Like truth had no weight if it didn't come dressed in drama. So I turned to something that couldn't be denied. Video. I had a small hidden camera installed near Melissa's front porch, tucked beneath the eaves. Legal gray area. Perhaps. But I wasn't planting it inside the house. Just at the entry. Just enough to confirm what Eli had whispered to me the night before. She leaves, Grandma. At night, with someone. Then I just sit there, alone. Those words wouldn't leave me. So I acted, quietly, strategically. I used an old contact from when I used to consult on corporate fraud audits. He owed me a favor. Within days, the camera was in place. I prayed we'd never need the footage. But a week later, around 11:20 p.m., my phone buzzed. Eli. Grandma. She's going out again. I'm alone. I stared at the message. The clock blinked 11:22 p.m. I didn't reply. I grabbed my coat, keys, and quietly stepped out. The night was cold, quiet, the kind of stillness that hums louder than noise. Her street was about 20 minutes from mine. I parked a few houses away, engine off. I didn't go up to the house. I didn't knock. I just watched. Melissa's porch light was on. Then, moments later, the door opened. Eli stood there in the doorway, barefoot, in pajama pants. Small hands clutched around the doorframe. His silhouette looked so small, so fragile under the yellow light. Then she appeared. Melissa, hair done, full makeup, tight dress, heels that clicked louder than a gavel in court. She didn't glance at Eli. She didn't say a word. A sleek black car rolled up. Not a cab, not an Uber. Driver's door opened. A man I'd never seen before stepped out. Tall, clean-shaven, mid-30s. Expensive cologne, judging by how fast it hit me from down the block. He smiled, leaned in, kissed her cheek like they'd done it 1,000 times. She laughed. Not just a polite giggle. A full, flirty laugh I hadn't heard from her even at my son's funeral. Then they both got into the car and drove off. Eli was still at the door. He didn't move. Not until the car disappeared. He looked out into the night, toward nothing. His little shoulders dropped. Slowly, he stepped back inside and shut the door. I stayed in my car for another 15 minutes, long enough to feel the anger burn away into something colder. Resolve I didn't cry. Not that night. But I whispered something out loud to the windshield. You're not alone, baby. Not anymore. When I got home, I went straight to my desk, pulled up the camera's live feed archive, found the timestamp, saved the clip, backed it up on 3 drives. Then I opened a blank folder and typed a name at the top, the case for Eli, and under it, the first entry. Night footage, 11:27 p.m. Melissa leaving child alone. The next morning, I called my lawyer. I told him I had more footage, that I was willing to go all the way. He hesitated. Adele, this could get messy. Custody cases like this can be I know, I cut in, but bruises don't lie. And neither does neglect. We're done playing nice. Before he could argue, I added, she left an 8-year-old alone. Again. And this time, we have proof. He sighed. Send me the clip. I'll start drafting. I hung up and exhaled for the first time that day. Back at the kitchen table, I brewed a cup of coffee, staring out the window at the rose bush I'd planted years ago with my late husband. It hadn't bloomed in a while, but that morning, beneath the leaves, a single bud had begun to open. Not much, just enough. And I smiled. Because in this war they dragged me into, I wasn't fighting to win. I was fighting to protect. And that changes everything. Eli didn't say much when he called that morning. Just, Grandma, I need to see you. Alone, I drove out to meet him near the corner of his school, under the tall oak tree where I used to wait for his father when he was a boy. Eli stood there, hugging his backpack like it was armor. His eyes searched mine before he reached in and pulled out a tiny black flash drive, no larger than a paperclip. He placed it in my hand like he was giving me a grenade. I kept everything, he said, voice barely audible. Just in case. I blinked. What do you mean, sweetheart? He looked down at the pavement. The cameras. The audio. Things I recorded. Stuff I saved from the tablet Dad gave me. My breath caught. My hands trembled. We sat in the car for a moment, the silence thick and loaded. I didn't know what I'd find on that drive, but my body already knew. Grief has a way of foreshadowing. Back at home, I closed the curtains, locked the doors, and sat down with my laptop. The screen lit up with folders, each carefully labeled. Bathroom, March 14th. Kitchen, April 3rd. Midnight, May 21st. I clicked on the first one. The video was shaky, propped at an angle from the corner of a hallway. Eli's small frame was visible, sitting on the floor, clutching a blanket. From off-screen, Melissa's voice pierced the air. You think you can cry and I'll feel bad? Stop being so pathetic. He didn't say anything, just pulled the blanket tighter. The next video was from the kitchen. Eli sat at the table, eating cereal. Melissa walked in with her phone, laughing. Don't expect dinner. I'm going out. But I thought, he started. She cut him off. I'm not your babysitter. Eat whatever, or don't. Then she was gone. The front door slammed. I couldn't stop the shaking in my fingers. I opened another file. This one was just audio. I heard Eli talking, maybe to himself, maybe to the memory of his father. Why did you leave me with her dad? I closed the laptop. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt like someone had taken a sledgehammer to my ribs. That voice, his pain, cut deeper than any betrayal I had ever experienced. I'd known things were bad, but not this. Not this. It wasn't just neglect. It was emotional starvation, psychological cruelty, wrapped in the quiet corners of an otherwise nice-looking house. I went to the kitchen, made a cup of tea I never drank, and stood at the window watching the afternoon melt into evening. I could hear Eli's voice in my head, echoing over and over. Why did you leave me with her, Dad? That question wasn't just for his father anymore. It was for me, too. I'd let the court delay the process. I'd respected the legal system, hoping it would see the truth in time. But now I saw what Eli had seen all along. Truth wasn't always loud. Sometimes it sat quietly in a corner, bruised and ignored. I took out a yellow legal pad and began writing. Call attorney. Secure duplicate of drive. Request emergency hearing. Reach out to therapist. Prepare formal affidavit. Each line I wrote felt like reclaiming ground we had lost. Eli hadn't just trusted me with this drive. He had given me his last sliver of hope. That night, I watched every single file. Not because I needed more pain, but because he needed to know someone finally saw him, heard him, believed him. When the last video ended, I closed the laptop gently, as if tucking in a sleeping child. I whispered aloud, to no one in particular, "I see you, Eli, and I'm so sorry." There was no going back now. No more waiting for the system to care. No more standing at the sidelines while my grandson suffered behind manicured hedges and polite lies. The woman in those videos wasn't grieving. She was grooming sympathy from strangers while breaking the child she was supposed to love. And I had proof. For the first time in months, I felt something rise in me. Not anger, not sorrow, but clarity. I was done playing soft. This time, I wasn't just going to be a grandmother. I was going to be his guardian, his advocate, his voice. And with the flash drive in hand, I was ready to fight. I sat across from my attorney, clutching the manila envelope that held Eli's flash drive and my heart. His voice echoed in my head. I kept everything. Just in case. That single sentence, spoken so quietly, had shaken something loose in me, a reserve of strength I thought had long dried up. Across the polished walnut table, Marcus, my attorney, looked at me over his reading glasses. He was kind, measured, and discreet. A friend of my late husband's who had handled our estate quietly for over 2 decades. When Joseph passed, it was Marcus who ensured Eli's trust was airtight. Now, he was the only one I could trust to protect Eli again. "I want to initiate a custody challenge," I said, sliding the USB drive toward him. "And I'm willing to put up the entire estate if that's what it takes." He paused, fingertips resting on the flash drive like it was a detonator. "You're saying the full estate? The $4 million? All of it?" I nodded. "This isn't about money. It's about protecting my grandson, and it's about dignity." His eyes softened. "Adele, I know how much you've endured, but this will not be an easy battle." I nodded. "I'm not expecting easy. I'm expecting justice." He plugged in the drive. The first clip began to play on his laptop. Eli, maybe 7 or 8, stood quietly in a dim hallway, his voice barely a whisper. "Mommy's mad again." She threw her wine glass. It shattered all over my sketchbook. Then, another clip. Eli's voice on a different night, shaky and close to tears. "Why did you leave me with her, Dad?" Marcus turned the laptop screen away. "That's enough," he said quietly. "This is admissible. And damning. We'll need to file for emergency review." "I want you to have full power of attorney," I told him, "to act swiftly. No delays. I'm too old to navigate courtrooms and hearings, but I am not too old to fight." Marcus pushed the papers toward me. "I took the liberty of preparing these already." Call it a hunch. The pen trembled slightly in my grip as I signed my name, not out of fear, but out of certainty. With each stroke, I wasn't just signing documents. I was signing away silence. I was signing for Eli. For the boy who had stood alone in the dark while his mother screamed in the background. For the child who had the courage to whisper into a camera in case the world didn't believe him. The next days moved like clockwork. Marcus filed a petition for temporary guardianship, citing endangerment and emotional neglect. Attached were time-stamped recordings, voice logs, screenshots of texts Eli had forwarded to me. everything laid out in sequence. I didn't need to say a word in court yet. My presence alone, as the executor of Joseph's estate and the only remaining adult in Eli's paternal bloodline, carried enough weight. But when Marcus presented the materials, I watched the judge's expression shift from neutral to troubled. "This isn't just about custody," Marcus said firmly in court. "It's about dignity. This child deserves more than legal jargon and shared weekends. He deserves safety, stability, a future." Those words, "it's about dignity," rippled through the room like thunder. Melissa, who had strutted in with heels and an expensive blazer, looked smaller by the second. Her lawyer fumbled through objections, but it was clear they hadn't expected this. And why would they? They thought I was just an old woman with a fading voice and a fixed income. They didn't know that I had quietly maintained every deed, every document, every recording of phone calls and agreements signed with Joseph. They didn't know I had watched and waited, not out of weakness, but restraint. When court recessed for the day, I stepped outside into the brisk wind. Eli was waiting on the bench, clutching a paper cup of hot chocolate, his legs swinging gently. He looked up at me and asked, "Did you do it?" I knelt down beside him. "I did, sweetheart." "We did." He leaned into me, resting his head on my shoulder. For a moment, we sat in silence, not the kind that feels empty, but the kind that speaks volumes. That silence said, "You are not alone anymore." And I knew then. Whatever came next, no matter how drawn out or complicated, we had already won something irreplaceable. We had reclaimed our voice, our worth, our dignity. The moment the judge issued the temporary custody order, I felt something inside me shatter. It didn't matter that we were preparing to present evidence. It didn't matter that my lawyer had the flash drive or that we had financial power behind us. None of that stopped the gavel from falling, and none of it stopped the bailiff from walking over to Eli and saying, "Time to go home, son." Home. But it wasn't his home, not in the way that word is supposed to mean something soft, something safe. I tried to stay composed as they led him away. Eli looked back at me only once. His eyes, wide and wet, clung to mine like they were begging me not to let go. I pressed my hand to my heart and mouthed the words, "Stay brave. Just one more step." He nodded. That small, brave nod almost broke me. The house I returned to felt different without him. There was no small pair of sneakers by the door. No, clattering in the kitchen as he poured cereal like it was a science experiment. Just silence. Deep, bitter silence. I sat by the window all evening, staring at the path where we used to walk after dinner. I knew Eli was scared. I could feel it in my chest, like a phantom ache. And I hated how helpless I felt, knowing he was under that woman's roof again. It wasn't even midnight when my phone buzzed. One message. No words, just a video file. I opened it with trembling fingers. The screen lit up to reveal a darkened room. Eli's room, I realized. His old one, before he came to live with me. Same dull paint, same broken blinds. But something was different. He had propped his tablet on the dresser, and I could see him sitting on the edge of the bed, holding the teddy bear I had given him on his 6th birthday. The little blue one he called Captain Snuggle. Eli took a deep breath. His voice was low, barely above a whisper. "If anyone sees this, I just want to say, I want to live with Grandma." He looked down, burying his face in the teddy bear's fur before continuing. "I don't like it here. Mommy yells a lot. I don't feel safe. Last night, she threw a plate at the wall because I forgot to turn off the bathroom light. She said I was just like my dad. She always says that. He sniffled, wiping his nose with the sleeve of his pajama top. But with Grandma, I can sleep all night. She makes me pancakes that look like dinosaurs. She helps me with homework, and she never calls me names. My breath hitched. I don't want to go back to school smelling like smoke again. Please, please let me stay with Grandma. The video ended with him curling up on the bed, clutching the bear to his chest. I sat frozen. Tears streamed down my face, but I made no sound. There was a kind of grief in that video that felt deeper than anything I had known, even deeper than losing my son. Because this wasn't just about what had happened. This was about what could still happen. If I didn't act, if I didn't follow through with everything we had prepared, Eli would be trapped. And this time, no teddy bear in the world could shield him. The next morning, I met my attorney at her office before the sun rose. I want that video submitted as evidence, I said. File for emergency reconsideration. Today, she nodded. We'll add it to the packet with the previous files. And I want to be there. In the courtroom. Sitting right behind him, she gave me a look. Part surprised, part relieved. You'll get your chance, Adele. I closed my eyes. Stay brave. Just one more step. I repeated it to myself, like a vow. That afternoon, I visited Eli's school counselor. She had already filed 2 reports in the past year, quietly ignored because there hadn't been substantial enough proof. I showed her the video. She didn't say much, but her hand tightened around the tablet, knuckles white. I'll resubmit my recommendation to the court today, she said. On my way out, I walked past the school playground. I could almost see him there, feet pumping hard on the swings, shouting toward the sky. Grandma, look how high! I stood there for a long moment, letting the wind pass through me like a prayer. When I got home, I took the teddy bear I'd kept in a box from when Eli first arrived, the one he had outgrown. I set it by the fireplace, right beside the framed photo of his father, the last one we ever took before the accident. This isn't over, I whispered. That night, I sent Eli a message back, just 4 words. I saw your video. His reply came 10 minutes later, a heart emoji, and then, I love you, Grandma. I'll wait. So would I. Because my grandson's last hope wasn't a courtroom. It was me, and I wouldn't let him down. The courtroom felt colder this time, not because of the marble floors or the autumn wind brushing through the cracks, but because today was the day we confronted the truth. I sat quietly on the front bench, hands folded, heart steady. Eli walked in, his steps smaller than I remembered, but his eyes, they weren't afraid. Judge Martin adjusted her glasses and looked over the room. The attorneys murmured on both sides, but everything dulled around me until I heard case number 7,291, custody dispute regarding minor Eli Walsh. Eli stood beside his court-appointed guardian, a kind woman named Miss Raines. Across from them, Melissa adjusted her expensive blazer, sitting next to her lawyer, Mr. Drennan, a man known for his aggressive style. The judge began with formalities, then gestured for the mother's side to speak first. Mr. Drennan stood, voice confident. Your Honor, my client, Melissa Walsh, has always acted in the best interest of her son. The temporary arrangement was simply that. Temporary. She is prepared to resume full-time custody today. He sat down, satisfied. The judge turned to Miss Raines. Has the child expressed his wishes? Before Ms. Raines could speak, Eli took a small breath and raised his hand gently. May I say something? The room turned still. The judge tilted her head. Go ahead, young man. Eli pulled his phone from his jacket pocket. It looked far too large in his hands. He looked at me for a split second, and I nodded. Once. He turned to the judge. Would you like to see what I recorded last night? Melissa flinched. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering. The judge blinked in surprise but motioned forward. If you believe it's relevant, yes. Eli walked slowly up to the front and handed his phone to the bailiff. The judge received it, pressing play. The audio filled the courtroom like a thunderclap. Melissa's voice, raw, loud, venomous. You little brat. Cry all you want. When Brad moves in, you're going to learn who's in charge. A pause. Then the sound of something crashing. You think I care what that old witch tells you? She won't always be around. Gasps rippled through the room. My hands gripped my purse tightly. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I let the truth do the work. The judge's face froze mid-expression. She looked down at the transcript being printed live beside her, and then at Melissa. Melissa stood abruptly. That's taken out of context. He recorded that without permission. Enough. It was the first time Judge Martin raised her voice. Sit down, Mrs. Walsh. Melissa sat, pale as chalk. The judge looked at Eli again, who now returned to his seat, curling into himself. Do you feel safe living with your mother, Eli? He shook his head slowly. I only feel safe with Grandma. Silence. No lawyer spoke. No rebuttal came. I exhaled, for the first time in what felt like hours. Then, Judge Martin straightened in her chair and said, The court has heard enough. Custody will not return to the petitioner at this time. Full temporary guardianship is granted to Mrs. Adele Walsh. Effective immediately. I covered my mouth, not to hide a smile, but to hold back the sob rising in my throat. Eli turned to me, his eyes bright, not with tears this time, but with hope. Melissa slumped in her seat as her lawyer began whispering rapidly. I didn't listen. I stood up, met my grandson at the courtroom aisle, and reached for his hand. He ran to me without hesitation, arms wrapping tightly around my waist. We didn't say anything. We didn't need to. Because in that moment, everything changed. Not just for custody, but for dignity. And this time, the courtroom didn't just awaken. It witnessed. They say some victories don't need confetti or applause. Just silence. The kind that settles in your chest like peace after a storm. I was still holding Eli's hand as we stood before the judge. His palm was slightly damp, trembling, but he kept his chin high, just like we practiced. The courtroom was frozen in time. No one moved. No one breathed. The video he had played moments ago still hung in the air like smoke after a fire. Every word from Melissa, her slurred threats, her cold curses, lingered in our ears. Little brat, I told you, you keep that shut or I'll have Tyler fix you up for good. Then her laugh, hollow, cruel. It echoed more loudly in that courtroom than any testimony ever could. My grandson had held the phone steady in the darkness, pressed against his teddy bear's chest. I had gifted him that bear 2 years ago. I hadn't known back then it would become his shield. The judge, a woman with silver hair pulled into a tight bun, lowered her glasses slowly. The silence stretched. I felt Eli's fingers grip mine tighter. Then the judge finally spoke. I've heard from both parties. I've reviewed the file, and now, I've seen the truth. She turned to Eli first. Young man, she said, her voice gentler now. I want to thank you. That took courage. A lot of it. Eli nodded once, but he didn't speak. He didn't have to. The judge straightened. In the matter of Eli Marston's permanent custody, a pin could have dropped, and the echo would have cracked the walls. This court grants full permanent custodial rights to Mrs. Adele Marston. I felt Eli collapse against me in relief, wrapping his arms around my waist, his head buried in my coat. I didn't cry. Not in front of Melissa. Not in front of the room full of strangers. Instead, I did something much quieter. I bowed my head, and I whispered, "Thank you." It wasn't just to the judge. It was to the universe, to whatever grace had seen this boy through, to the strength he'd carried when no one should have expected it of him, to my late son, who I believe guided us in ways unseen. Across the aisle, Melissa exploded. "What? You think she's some saint? She turned my son against me. She's manipulative. You're all blind." Her voice climbed in pitch, shrill and unhinged. She tried to stand, but her lawyer, clearly prepared for this, gently pushed her shoulder back down. "Sit. Down," he whispered through clenched teeth. But she wasn't done. "You think this is over? You think you won, Adele? You're just an old, lonely woman playing hero. Enjoy it while it lasts, because that kid will resent you one day." The bailiff took a step forward, just in case. But I didn't need anyone to protect me. Eli had already done that, for both of us. I didn't look at Melissa. I didn't return her bitterness with mine. I just placed my hand on Eli's head, smoothing his hair gently, and whispered into his ear, "You're safe now." He looked up at me, eyes glassy, lip quivering. "We're going home, Grandma?" I smiled. "Yes, baby. We're going home." The judge banged her gavel once, final, firm. Court is adjourned. Chairs scraped back. Murmurs broke out. Reporters stirred at the back, ready to file their dramatic headline. But I wasn't interested in drama. I was only interested in dignity. We walked out quietly. No victory lap. No shouting. Just Eli's little hand still in mine, and a quiet resolve in my heart. On our way down the courthouse steps, a woman stopped me. She'd been seated near the back. "I just wanted to say," she began, her voice unsteady, "that what you did, it gives people like me hope." I held her gaze, saw the pain swimming just behind her eyes, saw the bruises she tried to hide beneath her sleeves. I nodded. Sometimes words aren't needed. Sometimes just knowing someone else made it through is enough. We stepped into the sunlight. For the first time in weeks, I let myself truly breathe. I looked down at Eli. His eyes were closed, face tilted toward the warmth. "Smells like roses," he said. I laughed softly. "That's because I wore perfume today." "Your grandpa used to like it." He grinned. "I like it too." We walked together toward the car. Slow steps, no rush. Melissa's voice no longer haunted us. The courtroom had seen the truth. And for once, the world had listened. After the courtroom emptied, and Melissa's cries had faded into the background like the last echoes of a bad storm, I found myself sitting in the back seat of the car, holding Eli's hand. He didn't say much on the ride home. He didn't need to. His fingers wrapped tightly around mine told me everything I needed to know. His relief, his grief, his confusion, and that quiet hope only a child can carry after surviving so much. When we got home, I asked if he wanted something to eat. He shook his head. "Can we go to the garden?" he asked instead, his voice small, almost apologetic. Of course, I replied. The garden wasn't just any place. It was his garden, my son's. David had planted every corner with purpose: lavender for peace, wild roses for joy, rosemary for memory. Even after his death, the flowers had kept blooming like his presence still lingered between the leaves. We stepped outside into the golden light of late afternoon. The roses were in full bloom. The air smelled of soil, sun, and everything sacred. I led Eli through the path David once walked every morning. The wooden bench beneath the old oak tree creaked slightly as we sat down, just the way it had all those years ago. Eli leaned into me. I let him. For a while, we just sat there in silence. Birds chirped from the branches above us. A breeze rustled through the garden. And somewhere nearby, the neighbor's wind chime offered its gentle hum. It was the kind of silence that wasn't empty. It was full of memories, of sorrow, of grace. And then I said, "There's something I want to share with you." He turned his head toward me, eyes wide and curious. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. It was old, scratched at the edges, but still worked. David used to carry it with him when he went on hikes or long drives. Sometimes he'd record thoughts or messages to Eli, just in case. "I found this last winter. I was going to wait until you were older," I said, pausing. "But I think you need it now." He looked at the recorder in my hand as though it were a piece of treasure. I pressed play. Static crackled, and then David's voice filled the garden. "Hey, buddy," he said, his voice rich with warmth and calm. "If you're listening to this, it means something probably happened. And I want you to know, I love you, always. Nothing, not time, not distance, not even death can ever change that." Eli's grip on my hand tightened. David's voice continued, "You have your mom. And I know she's hurting too. But she's strong, Eli. Stronger than anyone I've ever known. No matter what happens, I know you'll be safe with her." A beat of silence. "She's your lighthouse, and you're hers." I looked down. Tears welled up in Eli's eyes, shimmering like morning dew on a petal. He wasn't sobbing, just silently letting them fall, like the garden itself was cradling him. I didn't speak. I didn't interrupt. I let David have this moment with his son. The recording ended with the soft click of the tape. Eli finally turned toward me and whispered, "I miss him so much." "I know, sweetheart," I said, pulling him into a full embrace. "I do too." Every day, his small arms wrapped around me, tighter than I thought possible. "Why did she lie?" he asked after a while. "About Dad. About everything. I didn't have all the answers. I wish I did." "Sometimes," I said carefully, "people hurt others because they don't know how to face their own pain. But what she did to you wasn't your fault. You know that, right?" He nodded slowly. I brushed his hair back from his forehead, just like I used to when he was a toddler falling asleep in David's arms. "You're safe now. That's what matters." He looked up at me, something flickering in his eyes that hadn't been there for months. Trust, maybe, or the quiet return of hope. "Can we come out here again tomorrow?" I smiled. "We can come here as often as you like." He leaned his head against my shoulder, and we sat that way until the sun began to set and the roses took on the color of twilight. The past still lived in this garden, but for the first time in a long time, it didn't feel like a weight. It felt like a root, a beginning. David's voice had reminded us both that love, real love, doesn't die. It grows, even in the cracks of grief, even when silence falls. especially then. I woke up that morning to the sound of Eli humming softly in the kitchen, a tune his father used to whistle when tending the garden. It was off-key and innocent, and it made my chest ache in the gentlest way possible. The house was still. For the first time in what felt like years, stillness didn't mean dread. It meant peace. No yelling, no walking on eggshells, just the distant rustle of leaves and the occasional soft thud of Eli's footsteps against the kitchen tile. We had our court papers now. Melissa hadn't come to pick him up. She hadn't even called, and I didn't need her to. The first thing I did that morning was walk into Eli's room, the one that had once been dull, painted in a color that could only be described as custody beige. I'd always meant to fix it up, but hadn't dared to until the custody was final. I rolled up my sleeves, picked out a soft sky blue paint, and by noon, I was on the second coat. Eli helped, of course. He got more paint on himself than on the walls, but he giggled the whole way through, and I let him. When he traced a tiny heart in the wet paint with his finger and whispered, "For Dad," I didn't say a word. I just kissed the top of his head. Next, we turned to the garden. It was overgrown, untamed roses reaching like desperate hands, weeds wrapping around what was once a neatly lined path. I could still see the bones of what had been a sanctuary. My husband's sanctuary. The one he built when we first bought the house. When Eli was just a baby, and Melissa still laughed easily. I found his old gardening gloves in the shed, still dusty, still holding the faint shape of his fingers. I slipped them on, not to wear, but to feel closer. Then I set to work. Eli followed behind me, tugging weeds, occasionally trying to talk to butterflies and naming worms. We replanted the roses, the ones he used to prune every Sunday morning before church. The same ones Melissa once said were a waste of time. I didn't care about her words anymore. Those roses were ours. Later, in the kitchen, Eli and I made tomato soup and grilled cheese. He was in charge of the cheese-to-bread ratio, an important task, he claimed. I let him press the sandwiches in the skillet while I stirred the soup. We didn't say much, but the silence wasn't heavy. It was warm, easy. After dinner, I pulled out one of the old books from the shelf, Charlotte's Web, a copy worn at the edges, the spine held together with a faded strip of tape. Eli curled beside me on the couch, his head resting on my arm, legs tucked beneath him. As I read, his breathing slowed. He wasn't asleep, but he was safe. "You know," I said softly, closing the book for a moment, "this house used to feel so big and empty, but not anymore." He looked up, confused. "Why not?" "Because now it's filled with the right kind of quiet," I whispered, brushing his hair back. "The kind that means we're not just surviving. We're living." Eli didn't answer. He just smiled. And it was a real smile, not the one he used to force when he was scared, or the one he used when pretending he was okay. This smile belonged to a child who felt safe. That night, before tucking him into bed, I noticed he'd placed something on his new nightstand, a framed photo of his father in the garden, holding him as a toddler. I hadn't even realized he still had it. The glass was cracked, but he'd taped it from behind. "Do you want a new frame?" I asked gently. "No," he said, clutching it close. "It's perfect like this. It reminds me of all the things we fixed I didn't press further." I kissed him goodnight, turned off the light, and stood at the doorway for a moment, just listening to his soft breathing. Later, I sat on the porch with a cup of chamomile tea, the stars scattered above like old friends returning. The wind smelled faintly of rosemary and soil. Somewhere in the distance, a nightbird called out. It struck me then. This wasn't the same house I had once felt buried in. It had changed. Or maybe I had. Grief had once soaked these walls. Now, they held stories, joy, second chances. I didn't know what Melissa would do next, whether she'd vanish or reappear one day, looking for a way back into Eli's life. But I knew one thing. She wouldn't find the same version of me waiting. This house wasn't just mine. It was Eli's too. And together, we were rebuilding it, one quiet day at a time. Not just surviving, living. The house was quiet again. Not the aching silence I once dreaded. The one that echoed with things unsaid, with betrayals I couldn't yet understand. This was a softer hush. The kind that cradles you, lets you breathe. Eli was reading by the window, his legs tucked up, the same way his father once sat when he was young. The air smelled faintly of the tea I'd brewed and the paint I'd used last week in his bedroom. Life had finally found its rhythm again. It was time. I went to the drawer in the study where I kept the most important things: old photographs, court documents, the deed to the house, and my will. I sat at the desk with a yellow legal pad, the same kind David used to scribble business ideas on when he couldn't sleep. Funny how cycles repeat. My current will had been made years ago. Back then, I wasn't thinking clearly. I had left the house to my son and a trust fund for his wife. I had believed in their future, in their goodness. That future was gone, but another had risen in its place. I picked up a pen and began to write. The house shall pass to Eli, my grandson. I paused, the pen tip hovering over the page. It didn't feel complete. This house wasn't just walls and a roof. It had been built with hope, nurtured with love, defended with dignity. And if it was to be passed on, it had to carry that spirit. I wrote again, slower this time. The house shall pass to Eli Langford, provided that upon reaching the age of 25, he commits to aiding at least one other child who, like him, has endured abandonment or loss. Be it through mentorship, housing, or education, he must pay the gift forward. I sat back, reading the clause over and over. Some might say I was tying a string to the gift, but I wasn't. I was giving it wings. This legacy wasn't just about ownership. It was about intention, about restoring what had once been broken in quiet, deliberate ways. Later that afternoon, I called my attorney, Grace. She had always handled our family's paperwork, even when it hurt her to do so. She listened as I read the new clause aloud. "That's powerful, Adele," she said gently. "You're building something bigger than a will." I smiled. "I'm not holding on to power, Grace. I'm passing it on." Eli wandered into the room just as I ended the call. He glanced at the legal pad on the desk and asked, "What's that, Grandma?" I folded the paper carefully. "Just something for the future. Yours, mostly." He tilted his head. "Am I in trouble?" I laughed softly, walked over, and cupped his face in my hands. "No, sweetheart. You're my hope." He didn't fully understand, but he smiled anyway, then reached into his backpack and handed me a drawing. It was a messy sketch of the house with flowers all around it. He'd drawn us, me in the garden, him with a book. I traced my finger over the lines. "What are the words at the top?" I asked. He leaned in and read them aloud. "The House of Peace." Tears filled my eyes, unbidden. "Did you name it that?" He nodded, because that's what it feels like now. I took that drawing and slipped it between the pages of the will. One day, when he was older and maybe questioning things, he'd find it there. A reminder that love doesn't just protect, it prepares, it provides. That night, after Eli went to sleep, I sat in the garden with my tea, wrapped in the shawl David had given me long ago. The wind rustled through the roses I'd replanted, and I thought of all the voices that had once filled this space. Some had left pain behind. Others, like David's, still lingered like a melody. For years, I had lived as though survival was the goal, quietly enduring, silently suffering. But now I knew better. We're not just surviving. We're living, reclaiming, restoring. And when I'm no longer here, Eli will continue the story. Not just because I told him to, but because he will have lived it, felt it, in every quiet evening, every flower he replants, every child he helps. This house was once a battlefield. Now, it will be a sanctuary. Because we don't hold power. We pass it on. The garden was quieter than usual, though it hummed with the soft rustle of the breeze and the clink of silverware being set gently on mismatched tables. I had spent the morning tying ribbons to mason jars and slicing strawberries for the lemonade. Nothing fancy, just honest. Eli had helped me string fairy lights between the trees, and now they danced faintly in the afternoon sun, catching like tiny memories suspended in the air. By 3 o'clock, people began to arrive. Mrs. Carver from next door brought her famous lemon bars and a stack of old photo albums she thought I might enjoy. Mr. Linton, the middle school math teacher, came carrying a large bowl of pasta salad and a deck of cards. Eli's social worker, Julia, arrived with a bright scarf around her neck and eyes that shimmered with something between pride and relief. And behind her, in that quiet and steady way he had, came Benjamin, the lawyer who once looked at me over rimmed glasses and told me I had a right to fight. There were hugs, handshakes, small laughter, and the occasional tear quickly brushed away. No grand speeches, no ceremony, just people who had been there when it mattered most. People who chose kindness when it would have been easier to walk away. Eli ran around the yard with a couple of local boys, kicking a half-deflated soccer ball and laughing with that open-throated joy I hadn't heard in months. He had color in his cheeks again. He had light in his eyes. And for the first time, I wasn't holding my breath. I stood by the roses, newly planted after the old ones had been torn out during the chaos. Their roots hadn't settled yet, but they reached toward the sun anyway. Brave little things. As I sipped my lemonade, I caught Benjamin watching me. He smiled, a quiet nod of acknowledgement between two people who'd weathered the same storm from different decks. "You did it," he said simply. "No," I replied, my eyes still on Eli. "We did. We talked for a while, mostly about small things, an old bakery reopening, a new shelter being built across town. But under it all was something deeper, unspoken, a shared understanding that healing doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it comes in quiet afternoons and unspoken forgiveness. Later, as the sun began to dip, casting that golden light photographers call magic hour, I found myself alone at the edge of the garden, half watching Eli chase a butterfly across the lawn. My knees ached, my back reminded me of my age, but my heart felt young. And then he saw me. Eli stopped running, dropped the soccer ball, and walked over with deliberate steps. His shirt was damp with sweat, and his hair clung to his forehead, But his smile, oh, his smile was wide and unguarded. "Maman," he said softly, standing in front of me. "I'm glad I chose you." I didn't say anything at first. I just looked at him, really looked. At the boy who once flinched at every noise, who slept with shoes on in case he had to run. At the child who had learned to read my favorite book aloud just to see me smile. At the soul who had every reason to close off, and yet somehow chose love instead. "I'll choose you," I whispered back, pulling him close, every time. And I meant it, not just when it was easy, but especially when it wasn't. Because family isn't built from blood alone. It's built from choice, from presence, from all the moments when love shows up and stays, even when the doors have been slammed shut. Behind us, someone turned on soft music from a Bluetooth speaker. A slow, old tune from my youth. Something about holding on and letting go all at once. The guests began to drift toward the food, toward each other, toward laughter. I stayed where I was, arms wrapped around the boy who saved me as much as I saved him. The breeze picked up slightly, carrying with it the scent of basil from the garden and fresh-cut grass. Overhead, a bird landed on the feeder, its song blending into the gentle chatter of the gathering behind us. And for a long, perfect moment, we just stood there. No battles to fight, no secrets left to hide, no threats looming over the horizon. Just a backyard full of gentle people, a warm breeze, a pair of arms wrapped around my waist, and a child who looked up at me like I was home. As the light began to fade and the first stars hinted at their arrival, I knew something had shifted, quietly, irreversibly. We weren't surviving anymore. We were living, together.